Hi, Catherine. You've gotten here already.
My class finished early, love.
Bonjour, mesdames. How's it going?
Great. We were just waiting for Ashley. How about you, Hortense?
Good, thank you. Well, here comes our American girl.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Sloan. Hi, girls. So, ready for our meeting?
I'm so excited to teach your students about the history of women and feminism.
It's a need at this point. I'm still bitter about Trump, Dobbs, and whatever's going on in my country.
Especially when being a feminist equals being hysterical for some. But that's a subject for another day.
Indeed, it's crucial to understand that feminism is not a monolith but a broad spectrum.
All right, team. What about covering the spectrum of ideas in the women's suffrage movement for our first chapter then?
I do believe it's a great approach, one that will push our students to use their critical thinking.
So what do we start with? Women against women enfranchisement?
I've got the right person for this. Phyllis Schlafly, my fellow American. Note the irony.
Wasn't she one of the most vocal anti-feminists of the 20th century?
She for sure was.
Ah, Schlafly. Can't say I like her very much. She argued against the Equal Rights Amendment and wanted to stick to traditional gender roles.
Quite paradoxical when we know she built a public career, wrote books, and traveled extensively. You'd think she'd be less narrow-minded.
So she enjoyed the benefits of what pro-women rights activists fought for, but she was against women's rights.
You hit the nail right on the head, darling.
She reminds me of Mrs. Humphrey Ward.
Who?
Another woman who opposed feminism while benefiting from its progress. She was against women's suffrage. Yet, she became a successful writer and reformer.
Rather than being anti-women's rights, I would say she believed that men and women belonged in different spheres of activity and therefore had different responsibilities.
So, men as breadwinners and women as housewives. What a dreamy picture. Just how I want my life to be.
She wasn't per se against women's suffrage, but it was too soon for her. What feels ambiguous is that Mrs. Humphrey Ward was actually very involved in educating women.
According to her, there was no guarantee that women's suffrage would be a remedy for injustices.
She feels somewhat moderate. Reminds me of Florence Nightingale. She's an interesting middle ground too.
Indeed, she supported women's progress, but felt that it wasn't yet the time for gender equality.
So she was more pragmatic. Believed in feminism, but thought it was premature. How do we make students see her perspective?
Perhaps by asking them whether reform should be gradual or revolutionary.
That's where we bring in the suffragist and Millicent Fawcett. She believed in persuasion and peaceful campaigning.
Fawcett is a leading figure of the British women's suffrage movement. Her approach and leadership set her apart from more militant suffrage campaigners of her era.
She led the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, the largest and most influential women's suffrage organization in Britain, right?
Exactly. She believed in achieving women's rights to vote through what she called law-abiding tactics. So, peaceful, legal, and non-violent means, as she believed them to be more effective to win support for women's suffrage.
Her approach contributed significantly to the eventual partial enfranchisement of women in 1918 and full equal franchise in 1928, just a year before her death. Quite a legacy, if you ask me.
She was very critical of the militant and sometimes violent methods used by the suffragettes, like Emmeline Pankhurst with the Women's Social and Political Union. She was very critical of the militant and sometimes violent methods used by the suffragettes, like Emmeline Pankhurst, as the suffragettes' tactics would exclude the public and politicians, ultimately harming the cause.
Remind me again the difference between suffragists and suffragettes?
To put it simply, the suffragists believed in gradual evolution, so laws and reforms, while the suffragettes were more radical and believed in revolution.
These women were really something. They broke windows, set fires, and went on hunger strikes.
Like Emily Davison?
Like Emily Davison.
I've heard of her. She threw herself in front of the King's horse on Derby Day in 1913. She was rushed to the hospital, but she didn't survive her injuries.
Then she became an international martyr, impossible to ignore, unforgettable. What she did to herself was horrible, but what happened to her after her death was everything she hoped for. Not my words, though.
You've watched the documentary.
The Andrew Mars one on BBC, right?
Hey, not fair. Why didn't you share the documentary with me?
Apologies.
Whatever. Stories do have an extraordinary ability to inspire and evoke emotions.
But did extremism help, or did it hurt the cause? That would be the question we'll leave our students with at the end of the class.
A strong closing discussion. The complexity of the movement is a cornerstone of our classes.
Agreed. Let's challenge them to think beyond black and white views. Feminism has never been binary.
And history is always more nuanced than it appears.
Perfect. Let's make this a class they